They parked the van just outside Amsterdam. A quiet street, no cameras, no guards. Just a white panel van, locked and left under a street lamp. Inside, there was 57 kilos of amphetamine, just over £1 million in street value. But the men in charge weren't watching it. They were in the city, drinking, laughing, blowing off steam. Hours passed. The van sat untouched. What they didn't know, Dutch police had been watching them for days. It wasn't the first mistake this crew had made, but it would be the one that tipped the balance. What no one realized then, not even the officers who made the arrest, was what that single van connected to. A smuggling network that spanned countries. A logistics empire built to feed the entire UK drug trade, and a man at the center of it all, who called himself the Big Fella. This is the story of the £7 billion smuggling operation, and how one van left in the dark would bring the whole thing down. He didn't look like the head of a £7 billion drug empire. Paul Green lived in Widnes, Cheshire, a small industrial town tucked between Liverpool and Manchester. No convictions, no record. He ran cleaning businesses, had experience in hair salons, paid taxes occasionally. But behind closed doors, he controlled one of the most advanced and largest narcotics networks the UK has ever seen. He'd changed his name twice, first from Simon Swift to James Russell, then from James Russell to Paul Green. On paper, it looked like business rebranding. In reality, it was part of a long-running effort to stay hidden. Green wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but he understood how to move the product. His strength wasn't violence, it was paperwork. He created shell companies, bought up defunct trading names, cloned real firms to generate fake VAT numbers. Then, he used them to ship massive quantities of drugs inside legitimate goods. Strong-smelling food was the key: garlic, onions, ginger. Shipments looked like everyday deliveries. Legitimate hauliers were hired, nothing flagged at the border. If questions were asked, invoices were clean. Company names checked out. The consignments passed through. Green even rented warehouse space across the UK and the Netherlands. Wigan, Leeds, Sheffield, Rotterdam. All tied together through bogus businesses with names like Pot Fresh and Europroduce. Some loads moved 4 times a week. Most were never checked. He ran things quietly, almost corporately. Staff had defined roles. Couriers were paid in cash. Warehouse operators didn't know what they were storing. The system ran like a distribution network, not a street gang. Those inside the group didn't call him Paul. They called him the Big Fella, not for his size, but because they all knew who was really in charge and what he was building, one shipment at a time. The UK end was slick, but it couldn't function without what lay across the water. In 2017, Paul Green's operation leveled up. He formed a partnership with 2 figures on the continent, Barbara Reinbout and Johannes Vesters. Based in Utrecht, they weren't small-time suppliers. Reinbout was a fixer, a logistics manager, fluent in paperwork and deception. Vesters was older, quieter, and more seasoned. A long-time trafficker with deep connections across the Netherlands and Belgium. Together, they became the European backbone of the operation. The Dutch crew handled sourcing, storage, and dispatch. They acquired drugs, Class A and B, in bulk: cocaine, heroin, amphetamines, and cannabis. All moved through industrial units and warehouses set up under shell firms. Produce was bought in high volume. Tons of onions, garlic, and ginger from Spain and Dutch market, selected not for their market value but for their smell, strong enough to mask even the sharpest sniffing dog. Personal and business accounts were opened in the UK using forged ID documents sent from the Netherlands. Roosenbout liaised with Sohail Qureshi, Khalid Vazir, and Kazemfar Mahmoud, UK-based operators tasked with bridging both sides of the network. Their job to create fake UK companies that looked legitimate enough to rent warehouses, hire hauliers, and receive multi-ton loads of product. Weekly shipments flowed freely from Holland into the UK. Most were undetected. Some were sent to warehouses. Others went straight to the roads. broken down and distributed to criminal groups across England and Scotland. But as the scale increased, so did the attention. Dutch surveillance picked up movement. Wiretaps caught names and coded references. Conversations between Reinbout and her UK contacts were quietly logged. And when the Encrochat breach came years later, it would expose how deep the Dutch-UK link really ran. What began as a quiet partnership had become a full-scale international supply chain, and every crate, every shipment, every delivery led straight back to the big fella. Once the shipments crossed into Britain, the system kicked into gear. The drugs didn't stay in one place for long. From ports in the east of England, consignments moved inland, each one appearing to be nothing more than a load of fresh produce, delivered to warehouses that looked entirely legitimate on paper. These hubs were everywhere: Wigan, Leeds, Sheffield, Bolton, rented in the names of cloned or front companies, often mimicking real food distributors. Some existed only on paper. Others were physical units manned by individuals who didn't always know what they were storing. Loads were logged, left overnight, and moved again before inspectors ever had a chance to look in. In some cases, staff were told they were warehousing rejected vegetables. In others, the sites appeared abandoned but still had deliveries scheduled and collected regularly. Rotten produce was sometimes sent back across the channel, a tactic designed to create the illusion of returned goods, muddying up customs records and inspection patterns. Couriers and drivers were carefully insulated. Some were unwitting, hired through job ads or subcontracted through fake companies that paid in cash. They were told to move pallets from warehouse A to warehouse B, no questions asked. The scale was constant, loads didn't wait. 4 per week, moving through industrial corridors across England and up into Scotland. Orders placed by other OCGs came in fast, and Paul Green's network delivered, on time, every time. By the time the National Crime Agency started charting the routes, over 240 confirmed shipments had passed through. The paperwork, the movement patterns, the ghost companies, all pointed to the same reality. This wasn't a drug gang. It was a fully operational national supply chain, just one that fed the illegal market, not supermarket shelves. Amstelveen, 2016. A quiet suburb just outside Amsterdam. It should have been a routine transfer. Russell Leonard had been trusted with the cargo, 57 kilos of amphetamine, sealed and hidden inside a white van. Street value, just over £1 million. His job was simple: wait, protect the load, and deliver it. Instead, he parked the van and went drinking. Alongside an unnamed associate, Leonard headed into the city. They were seasoned operatives, fluent in Dutch, familiar with the routes. But that night, they dropped their guard and left the van unattended for hours. No lookout, no fallback plan. What they didn't know, Dutch police were already watching. The operation had been under quiet surveillance. Phones were being monitored. Their movements were tracked. The van had already been spotted and reported. And by the time the two men returned in the early hours, officers were already waiting. They barely got the engine started. Both men were arrested. The vehicle was seized. Inside, officers found the amphetamine, cleanly packed, unmistakable. For the Dutch authorities, it was a solid result. But for the UK's National Crime Agency, it was something else entirely, a thread, because the paperwork tied to that van didn't stop in Amsterdam. It is connected to a warehouse in Wigan, to a haulage firm in Rotterdam, to bank accounts in Leeds and shell companies in Cornwall. And it led to one voice on a recorded call: Paul Green. Furious about the blunder, he told an associate, "If that van's gone, there'll be fasting murders." The call was captured, the threat was clear, and the scale of what was unfolding had just shifted. The van incident wasn't the end. It wasn't even the first seizure. But it changed everything. It exposed the infrastructure, it brought new eyes onto the network, and it signaled the beginning of a takedown that would reach from Amsterdam to Cheshire. The arrest in Amstelveen didn't close the case, it opened it. After Leonard was taken in, Dutch authorities dug deeper. the van was just one piece. Within weeks, they flagged patterns in the export logs. Same companies, same produce types, same routes. The paperwork looked right, but something didn't add up. Back in the UK, the National Crime Agency had already been circling. They didn't yet know the full structure, but now they had a name. Paul Green. He wasn't on the radar before, no convictions, no traceable role. But the phone records from Leonard's case showed regular contact. Over the next 2 years, the surveillance widened. Officers began mapping warehouse leases, tracing vehicles, and checking customs declarations. What they found was consistent. Cloned companies, rotating addresses, falsified VAT details, all pointing back to the same loose network of names. In Lincolnshire, 2 major seizures were made, one at Killingholme, one at Immingham. Combined, they took 450 kilograms of heroin and cocaine off the road. A separate intercept on the Dutch side recovered 2 tons of cannabis headed for the UK. But the drugs were only part of the story. Investigators found a fake mortgage linked to Green and his associate Leslie Quin, worth over £260,000, obtained using a landlord's stolen identity. Shell companies like Blackpool Fruit and Veg were being used to open accounts, rent property, and funnel payments. Several had no actual staff. Others were registered to ghost addresses, empty flats or mailbox offices. Each seizure, each false record, each red flag added weight to the case. And by 2018, the picture was clear. This wasn't one crew smuggling one product. It was a network, vast, layered, and built to blend in. What began with one van in a Dutch suburb was now showing its reach across borders, business systems, and criminal economies. They used encrypted phones, EncroChat handsets that couldn't be traced or tapped, just messages in, messages out. No calls, no contacts saved. Everything is wiped with a single code. Most of the group relied on them. Paul Green didn't. His device, known on the network as Duck Farmer, was barely used. He preferred old-school tactics, face-to-face meetings, hotel Wi-Fi, burner numbers changed regularly. He didn't trust apps, but others were less careful. Nicknames used in chats matched aliases under investigation. Delivery plans, drop sites, quantities. The details weren't always obvious, but they added up, especially when cross-checked against vehicle movements and warehouse logs. When French police cracked EncroChat in 2020, the data poured in. Thousands of messages from users across Europe, including several tied to Green's operation. It wasn't a full blueprint, but it was enough. In 2019, the takedown began, coordinated, quiet, and deliberate. Paul Green was taken at his home in Widnes early morning. No warning, no resistance. Officers recovered cash, documents, and multiple phones. The man who had spent years avoiding attention didn't get time to run. Stephen Martin was arrested in Bolton. He'd been under surveillance for weeks. When officers entered, they found business records, encrypted devices, and signs of overseas property dealings. He was taken into custody without incident. Mohammed Ovice was picked up in Burnage, Manchester. Officers raided his home and seized nearly £45,000 in cash, along with 3 high-end cars parked outside. He was described by police as one of the core UK distributors, and he didn't deny it. On the other hand, Dutch police executed warrants simultaneously at multiple addresses. Reinboot was caught at home. Vesters was arrested at an industrial unit linked to the group's produce shipments. Both had been under wiretap surveillance for months. Khalid Vazir, Sohail Qureshi, and Ghazanfar Mahmoud, UK-based operators who helped set up fake companies and bank accounts, were all arrested in separate locations across England. Some were tracked via phone data, others had already been flagged through vehicle records and property leases. In total, 18 people were arrested across the UK and the Netherlands. No warnings, no shootouts. Just front doors opened in the dark, and one by one, the network was taken apart. It took years to build the case, and even longer to bring it through court. The first trial began in 2021 at Manchester Crown Court. It lasted 23 months, the longest criminal trial in English legal history. The second followed in 2023, running for another 9 months. Together, they laid out the full scale of the network. Over 240 confirmed shipments, with street values estimated at up to £7 billion. The jury deliberated for more than 140 hours. Prosecutors presented warehouse leases, financial records, intercepted phone messages, and evidence from multiple international seizures, alongside shell companies. Mapped delivery routes, linked logistics paperwork to encrypted chats and covert surveillance footage. What emerged was a structure as complex as any multinational business, except this one ran entirely on illegal trade. The sentences reflected the scale. Paul Green, 59, received 32 years, the longest handed down. He was named as the organizer, the one who controlled operations from behind the scenes. Stephen Martin, 53, was sentenced to 28 years for managing the group's finances and maintaining the transport flow. Mohammed Ovais, 46, received 27 years for coordinating the movement of drugs across the UK. Russell Leonard, 48, was handed 24 years. On the Dutch side, Barbara Reinbout, 53, was sentenced to 18 years, and Johannes Vesters, 54, received 20. Both were found guilty of facilitating cross-border shipments and laundering proceeds. Sohail Qureshi, 64, was sentenced to 25 years. He acted as the key link between the UK and Dutch OCGs, helping to establish new supply lines. Khalid Vizier, 58, received 20 years for helping forge documents and set up UK banking access for the Dutch crew. Ghazenfar Mahmoud, 53, was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months after being convicted of his role supporting the Dutch partnership and serving as a company director abroad. Oliver Penter, 41, received 24 years for packing drugs in the Netherlands and managing concealment operations. Alan Cumming, 54, was sentenced to 21 years for coordinating logistics and assisting in importations. Iftikhar Hussain, 50, received 4 years for assisting with UK warehouse operations and distribution. Maxime Van Milt, 35, received a 2-year suspended sentence for acting as a director of a front company used in the conspiracy. Ian Hendricks, 24, received a 2-year suspended sentence for assisting his mother, Reinbout, in packing and concealing narcotics. Ashley Jones, 34, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for his role in packing and concealment of drugs in the Netherlands. Leslie Kewen, 63, died before sentencing, but was found guilty of mortgage fraud and identity theft used to fund the network. In total, more than 251 years of prison time were handed down. 251 years in total. An entire empire, built on false names and frozen vegetables, has now gone. What do you make of the sentences? Too harsh? Not enough? Or exactly what was needed for a £7 billion empire? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more real UK cases broken down like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll keep digging. There's always another story behind the next knock at the door.